and I'm also the founder of WTC, an on-campus organization dedicated to discussing the truth of relevant issues, especially those which for some reason or another are marginalized by most major media outlets, and for some reason we don't talk about them openly. Our panelists for today's presentation will be Dwain, Deets, Gregg, Rob Leslie, and myself. Dwain Deets is a retired NASA engineer and one of the leading members of architects and engineers for 911Truth. Gregg Roberts is a freelance technical writer and business analyst, and Rob Leslie is an independent software engineer with a bachelor's degree in computer science. And I'm just
go down here that Saturday and you smelled the soup. Well, you smelled dead bodies, but you also smelled a super sulfur smell. I mean, super duper. Weeks at the time, it was still there. But somebody could try to explain to me that that was from the drywall. Now, the drywall smell like sulfur if it's pulverized?
We had to deal with this question. I wanted to go off as a banana thermite paper, and people would try to say that the sulfur we found in the dust and the steel melted microspheres, the traces we found came from the drywall. The sulfur they're talking about is in the form of calcium sulfate. The sulfate means sodium sulfur plus 4 oxygen atoms bound together tightly. You don't get sulfur away from that oxygen very easily at all. Certainly not from ordinary fires. It's possible some of it came loose, but it was all pulverized at the same time. You have to hold those things together. So that was done with other sulfur, but not for the drywall.
I also think there's a fair amount of stuff just on the internet and 9/11 truth movement things. A lot of them have nothing to do with the question of the forensic evidence for the collapse of the buildings. I think a lot of it is distraction. So I think we kind of pick and choose things that are not super relevant. Not saying that it's not relevant, but I mean whether that question factors into the free fall of Building 7, the pools of molten iron. I just think there are other things that are just so much more indicative of a controlled demolition than whether sulfur came from a dry body.
Asking this question because I remember having a conversation with someone in the military who uses thermite when they enter doors and things, and that thermite doesn't create an explosion. It just creates a bright light and like instant melting. So, like, is that because of air compression that there were explosions after the thermite went off, or is there another reason why there were suddenly explosions, or?
Yeah, I wouldn't say thermite would have caused blasts. I would say that would have to have been nanothermite or other non-explosives, which the government has refused to test for, in spite of the guidelines, the National Fire Protection Association 921 guidelines calling for that. When there's damage such as we saw, when things are shattered, you look for why it was shattered. It would seem like common sense, but they refused to do those tests.
Thank you very much.
As another little short thing to that, I thought my understanding was that while thermite is an incendiary and not an explosive, the high-grade nanothermite, its particles being so small allowed for explosive results. That was my understanding. So while conventional thermite would be an incendiary, nanothermite is an explosive. And I think that was very briefly said in the slides.
Excuse me. Professor Niels Harrit went ahead and said precisely what you did, that nanothermite has percussive effects, and it is an explosive as opposed to thermite. There's a Danish professor by the name of Niels Harrit who's been at the forefront of doing investigations on some of this residue.
He's the lead author of the paper I helped write.
And I believe that he believes that nanothermite has percussive effects, and it is indeed an explosive, unlike the thermite and thermate.
It's not only because of the particle size, although that certainly drives the speed of the actual movement of oxygen away from the iron oxide to the aluminum, but it's also embedded in what they call a sol gel, a dried organic material. And so when that carbon and oxygen and hydrogen is ignited, it creates a gas which can then expand just like any other explosive.
Keep in mind too that we're not saying that thermite was responsible for destroying the buildings. You don't have to say that. It's enough to question why is the thermite dust.
There's no logical explanation for it. So thermite was involved somehow. We don't know how specifically, but the question is, why is it there?
Hi, thank you. I had a couple of quick questions about specifically World Trade Center number 7. The first few observations, when in your presentation you showed the 7-second free fall collapse, I'm wondering why you left out the entire video of the collapse, which actually, to credit Dan, rather in the presentation you showed us from architects and engineers for 9/11 with Gage speaking, you see the eastern penthouse on top of World Trade Center 7 start to collapse. It collapses a few seconds before the rest of the building. So I'm wondering if thermite was used, how does that explain that collapse rather than fire weakening the structural foundation of the building?
My emphasis was on the 2.5 seconds because of the pure free fall. You saw the penthouse begin collapsing. That was prior to that start of the counting of the 2.5 seconds.
So correct me if I'm wrong, from what I understood, that's also problematic because the penthouse falling first before the rest of the building would indicate core column damage. And it fell straight down against symmetrical damage due to asymmetrical to very small fires. Black, not very much damage when we have a symmetrical collapse, and there's no reason that there should be that much core column damage. That penthouse telescopes perfectly straight down.
For a while, NIST tried to say that the whole timeline should start at the first penthouse collapse, and then the second goes, you go through this whole thing of the destruction of the building. The problem with that is, it's when the roof line starts falling that the structure is responding to something. If the penthouse collapses and then stops, there's no motion. The momentum of that, or whatever caused that to happen, isn't the cause of the rest of the whole building going down. It's ridiculous. It's a penthouse. 47-story steel structure that's built so you can remove alternate floors in case a tenant wanted a 2-story space inside there. Okay? It's a ridiculous argument to try to start the starting point so far ahead. I'm not saying your question is ridiculous. I'm saying this position was ridiculous. And they have since admitted that there was pure free fall for about 2.5 seconds, 2.25 seconds, which is 108 feet, 8 stories of steel structure. There again, if we had nothing else, that would mean controlled demolition.